Hey guys, how's it going? My name's CJ, this is Rise or Fall, and in today's video, we're going to be discussing the NFL playoff slate for this Sunday's divisional matchup between the Cleveland Browns and Kansas City Chiefs and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the New Orleans Saints. In this video, we're going to be going position by position, game by game, trying to give you some good plays to roster over on DraftKings and FanDuel. So let's get right into it. Pat Mahomes, number one quarterback on the board, and for good reason. We know Pat Mahomes and his pedigree and what he can do. He's priced at $8,000 over on DraftKings and over on FanDuel, $9,200. DraftKings, he's projected to score 20.22 points, and on FanDuel scoring 19.02 points for Pat Mahomes. So let's look at his game logs real quick and see what Pat Mahomes has been up to in his recent matchups. Well, just simply brilliant. 20.22 against Atlanta, a little bit of a downer for Mahomes there. If you remember, Kansas City kind of struggled against Atlanta, which was a total surprise. Very low scoring game, 17-14. I think if you were like me and most people, they thought Kansas City would just roll over Atlanta and dominate on their way into the playoffs, but didn't quite work out that way. Kind of a bit of a surprise. But game before that, week 15 against New Orleans, 26.86 points for Mahomes. And then against Miami in week 14, 24.62. And then Denver, 22.32. So Pat Mahomes on the season, 27.3 fantasy points per game average. You love to see that. As we mentioned, he's 7,900, which by far makes him head and shoulders the most expensive quarterback over on DraftKings. Let's take a look real quick. Over at FanDuel, same situation. Way more expensive than the likes of Tom Brady, Baker Mayfield, Drew Brees. So you're going to have to pay up to get the safety and upside of a Pat Mahomes on both sites. But guys, speaks for himself. I mean, his game logs are monsters. You can expect 20 to 25 fantasy points easy with 30-point upside at times. So I love Pat Mahomes. That is a very safe yet expensive but safe way to go to start building your lineups. Let's talk about the next guy, though. Tom Brady, the GOAT. He had a pretty big game last week. This week, he gets a rematch. This is his third time facing New Orleans this season. He struggled in his previous two meetings with New Orleans. But at least we have a little something to look at to kind of get an idea of how Tom Brady will do against the Saints. He's priced at $6,300, making him the second most expensive quarterback on Sunday's slate. $7,700 over on FanDuel. His projections on DraftKings, 15.23. And then over on FanDuel, 14.28. So let's look at his game logs real quick. We'll look at not only his last few, but we'll go back to those matchups against New Orleans and see how he did against them as well. So against Washington, great game for Brady, 26.04, which was about 3 points higher than his season average. 2 games prior to that, 34.26, 32.92, 26.4. So you can see, guys, it seems like things are finally starting to come together for Tom Brady and this Buccaneers offense, which you couldn't ask for better timing, right? Entering the playoffs, hitting your stride. This looks like a good one here for Brady, but let's scroll down. As we talked about, he did have some struggles earlier in the season against New Orleans. Going back to week 9, this was his second matchup against New Orleans. Guys, they couldn't even get the end zone. They managed just 3 points and got blown out of the water by the New Orleans Saints, 38-3. Now, Brady attempted 38 passes, only completing 22 of them. Did not have a passing touchdown, threw 3 picks, for a miserable 5.36 fantasy points in that one against New Orleans. Let's back it all the way up to week 1 against New Orleans. Again, he attempted 36 passes, completed just 23 of them, 239 yards, 2 touchdowns, but also 2 picks there. So he's thrown, 5 interceptions against New Orleans here in 2 meetings. But he did finish with 22.46 fantasy points. I think it would be fair to say that Tom Brady now, in this offense now, is a much different Tom Brady and a much different Buccaneers offense than what we've seen in week 1, than what we saw again in week 9. So I would expect a better performance from Tom Brady. This is a highly publicized matchup against another future Hall of Famer in Drew Brees. I expect Brady and the Buccaneers offense and their coaching staff to be all systems go, prepared and ready to come in to play and win. So there you have it on Tom Brady, just $6,200, a good pay down option if you don't want to spend all the way up for Pat Mahomes. The next highest projected quarterback is Drew Brees. New Orleans Saints, obviously facing off against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Drew Brees is priced at just $5,600, $7,300 over on FanDuel. Not an easy matchup for Brees, but that's been the case for every quarterback who's faced off against the Buccaneers for the most part. We've seen the Bucs defense, they can get passed on, guys. Their front line, their defensive line and linebackers are very, very good, maybe the best in the league. Where they're weak is in the secondary. So I'm sure New Orleans knows that, and they're going to look to exploit that matchup. Nonetheless, Drew Brees projected for 14.23 points behind Tom Brady. 13.53 points on FanDuel. Again, just slightly behind Tom Brady there as well. Opening up the game logs real quick on Brees. We'll look at his last few games, and we'll also go back to his previous two meetings against the Buccaneers and see if we can kind of get an idea of what to expect from Drewski. His last few, 18.8. Of course, he's coming back from a pretty significant injury that he suffered. 20.04 against the Carolina Panthers. 13.14 against the Vikings. And then back in Week 15 against Kansas City, 20.36. So he really hasn't gotten anything much over 20 points. 20 has been his ceiling, I guess you could say, over his last few games. But let's dial it back. We'll go all the way back to Week 1 like we did with Brady and see how Brees did there. He ended up attempting 30 passes, which is a bit low for a guy like Brees, completing 18 of them, just 160 yards, but he did put in 2 touchdowns. Ended up with 14.4 fantasy points on the day. Fast forward a little bit, Week 9, the rematch against the Bucs, 32 pass attempts. So as you can see, he's averaging about 31 pass attempts in his previous 2 meetings against the Buccaneers. Maybe that is a telltale sign of what's to come for Brees. Maybe he attempts around that 30 to 32 pass attempts in this game as well, unless the Buccaneers somehow come out and build a big lead and get ahead. Then maybe Brees has to throw a bit more. But anyway, he finished with 222 yards in this one. So again, not a very high yardage total from Brees, but 4 touchdowns really helped his final stat line of 23.68 points over on DraftKings. So for the season here, guys, you could see Brees is just a tick under 19 fantasy points per game. But I think he makes for a pretty good value play here. Maybe even a better value than Tom Brady at just $5,500, as you saw in the projections over on the NFL Study Hub on TeamRiserFall.com. TeamRiserFall.com. That Brees was just slightly projected, under Tom Brady. So as far as a value play goes, I think Brees makes for a better value than Brady. But you can see the price difference here. Brees, $7,300. Brady, $7,700. I don't mind saving a few $100 maybe going down to Brees if you think that he has a comparable game to Brady, ends up finishing, close in terms of total fantasy points. But moving on to the last quarterback that is viable, worth playing, Baker Mayfield, $5,300 over on DraftKings, $7,400 over on FanDuel. His projection on DraftKings, 13.68 points. His projection on FanDuel, 13.02 points. Let's dig in on Baker Mayfield just a bit. In his last game against Pittsburgh, huge high-scoring game here. 48 points were put up by Cleveland. He ended up with 22.82 fantasy points in that one, way over his season average of 17. I don't think that most weeks Baker Mayfield's going to be a 20-plus point per game guy. So this is a bit of a ceiling game, an upside type of game for him. Going back to the week before that against Pittsburgh once again, 16.24. Going back to week 16 against the Jets, he struggled, which is kind of a surprise. But, the Jets were a sneaky good defense this season. If you played the Jets in DFS this season, they were usually down there $2,500 or less. There's a lot of games where you could take them for, next to nothing, and they were putting up pretty good points. But 20.98 in Baker's week 15 matchup against the Giants. But you can see what he's capable of, guys. 30-plus point upside in any given week, 34, 33. But then he's got some real stinkers in his game log too. But you've kind of seen it's been a roller coaster ride with Baker Mayfield. Here's what I'll say. If we, try to play out what will happen in this game and try to foresee and forecast the game script, Kansas City's going to put up points, right? More often than not, they're going to come out and they're going to just put up a ton of touchdowns. They're going to put a ton of pressure on the opposing team, in this case, Baker Mayfield and the Cleveland Browns offense. It's going to be a track meet. You're going to have to keep pace with us or we're going to blow you out of the water. That's how it is with Kansas City. So if you want to pay down at quarterback, I don't mind Baker Mayfield in this matchup. I think that Baker could end up attempting a whole lot of passes here, especially if they fall behind in Kansas City in the first half. So that's how I'm feeling about Baker. If I'm paying down, it's probably going to be for Baker. Otherwise, I'm probably paying up and taking the safety of Pat Mahomes. But let's go ahead and insert Mr. Mahomes in our lineup and move on to running back. We got some interesting options at running back this week. Of course, we know about the two-headed monster in Cleveland. We've also got the likes of Alvin Kamara on the board, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Leonard Fournette, who had a pretty big game last week for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But let's start at the top of the list here with Alvin Kamara. He is projected to be not only the most expensive running back, but also the highest projected scoring running back by far out of this group of guys. His price over on DraftKings, $7,900, $9,000 over on FanDuel. His projection, 16.04 points over on DraftKings. Projection over on FanDuel, 13.8. Let's look at the game logs for Kamara. Obviously, when Breeze is in the lineup, Kamara does a whole lot better than when Taysom Hill's in the lineup. So some of the game logs that you're going to see for Kamara, yeah, you kind of have to throw him out of the window. You kind of have to dismiss him. But let's look at the last few weeks with Breeze in the lineup. 19.6 for Kamara. Pretty good there. Huge game. 59.2. Definitely an outlier. He's not going to put up 59.2 fantasy points per game every week. That's crazy. 18.4 against Kansas City back in week 15. And then 22.4 against Philadelphia back in week 14. So you can see a season average, very healthy. A robust 25.2 fantasy points. Now, because we do have previous matchups of Kamara versus Tampa Bay, we're going to go all the way back to week 1 and explore what he was able to do against this Bucs defense. We talked about how good the Buccaneers front line is. We talked about how good their linebackers are. They could definitely pose problems for Alvin Kamara, and they did in week 1. He carried the ball just 12 times, managing 16 yards on the ground for only a 1.3 yards per carry average. So you hate to see that. He did get involved in the passing game, which is often the case for Kamara and the New Orleans Saints. They love checking down and getting passes to Alvin Kamara and targeting him. He ended up with 51 receiving yards and did catch a touchdown. So he had a good game through the air, not so great on the ground. Ended up with 23.7 fantasy points. Did have a rushing touchdown too. So he made up for the poor rushing yardage total with a touchdown on the ground and a touchdown through the air. So there you have it for Kamara in week 1 against the Bucs. Fast forward to week 9 against the Buccaneers. Again, struggled to do much on the ground. Only 9 carries though. 40 yards, a much better yards per carry average of 4.4. Did find the end zone once again and was involved in the passing game once again, seeing 6 targets, securing 5 of them, but just for 9 yards in that one. So great in terms of PPR because he got the 5 receptions, but didn't do much with those receptions, just totaling 9 yards. Ended up with just under 16 fantasy points on the day. So the Buccaneers are tough, guys. They're tough against running backs. Alvin Kamara, though, we know he's very involved in this offense. We know that he can find the end zone. So that's what you can expect with Alvin Kamara. Not a lot of yards on the ground, but definitely involved in the passing game and has that touchdown upside any given week. Let's talk about the next guy, though, Nick Chubb. He is the second most expensive running back on the board on both sites, DraftKings and FanDuel. $6,600 on DK, $8,200 on FD. If we scroll across the board here and look at what he's projected to score, 11.67 is projection for DraftKings, and on FanDuel, 10.4. Now, we talked about if we play out the game script here, maybe Kansas City gets a big lead. Maybe they come out and, throw some haymakers and drop a couple touchdowns in, and they're up 14 points, 21 points even before halftime. Well, that's not good news for Nick Chubb, because Nick Chubb's not really the pass-catching running back in this offense. That would be his teammate, Kareem Hunt. And of course, there's a little revenge narrative for Kareem Hunt, former Kansas City Chiefs running back. But Nick Chubb, you could get game scripted out here, buddy. But let's look at your game logs real quick. His last few, pretty impressive. I think a lot of people were kind of down on Nick Chubb last week. They didn't think he would do a whole lot against the vaunted Pittsburgh Steelers front line, but he did well. 24.5 fantasy points. Game prior to that against Pittsburgh, 19.8 fantasy points. So it's probably safe to call Nick Chubb matchup proof most weeks. I mean, Pittsburgh's one of the best teams in the league against running backs, and he overcame that matchup. Going back to week 16 against the Jets, 17.6. And then finally, week 15 against the Giants, 14.6. So kind of 2 games there where he was below his season average of 19.3 fantasy points. But, if this game can stay close, Nick Chubb's going to be involved. But if it doesn't, then, he may need to secure some passes. Now, that's what helped him last week against Pittsburgh. He was targeted 4 times, caught 4 balls for 69 yards and a touchdown. Not the norm for Nick Chubb. As I mentioned, Kareem Hunt, more of the pass-catching running back. But the roles were kind of reversed last week because Kareem Hunt ended up finding the end zone a couple times. Nick Chubb was more involved in the passing game. So they kind of did a role reversal, Chubb and Hunt. But while we're talking about Cleveland Browns running backs, let's just go ahead and pop open the game logs for Kareem Hunt as well. As I mentioned last week, he was the better runner on the ground in terms of getting those touchdowns. 8 carries for 48 yards, 2 TDs. Not very involved in the passing game. That was Nick Chubb's role last week. But previous games here for Hunt, 5.1, 14.2, and 5.8. So up and down over the last few weeks for Kareem Hunt. He's been very volatile, very hard to predict, very hard to trust in your DFS lineups. For the season, he's averaging 14.2 fantasy points per game. He's priced at just $4,800, which is reasonable. It's not a terrible price tag on a guy like Kareem Hunt who can get you a touchdown or 2, right, in any given game like we saw last week. Let's talk Kansas City running backs, though, with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the rookie for KC, priced at $5,500 over on DK, $6,100 over on FanDuel. Swig of water for the working man. His projections on DraftKings, he's projected at 10.03 points on DK and 8.99 points over on FanDuel. Edwards-Helaire has had some good games, but has also regressed quite a bit in recent weeks. Let's look at the game logs so we can get a better idea of what to expect from this young man. So if you go back to week 11, big game against the Vegas Raiders, 20.7 points. But then week 12, just 4.9. Week 13, no game log there. But week 14, 14.1 against Miami. Decent game there. And then 9.3 against New Orleans. And then he didn't play against Atlanta. So we got to take a look at the news on Edwards-Helaire real quick. He's got an ankle and hip issue. He did not practice Thursday, which is a little concerning. Like they said here, it's a step backward, at least on paper, as he was a limited participant Wednesday, but then didn't practice at all on Thursday. So you're going to have to take a look and see if he's practicing today being Friday. And if he is, then maybe we go Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But as of right now, it looks like he's somebody who you may want to stay away from and avoid, as he doesn't sound like he's 100%. Which brings up Le'Veon Bell, the other running back that they signed in the middle of the season here. Now, he hasn't done much either, though, guys. I mean, I'm not really impressed. Are you? against Atlanta, 4.9 fantasy points. He had a good game against New Orleans, 14.6. But then 5.5, 7.5. I mean, we'll dial it back a little bit here. 5.2. Here's another 10.6. I think there was high hopes when they signed Le'Veon Bell that maybe this would be a good landing spot for him and that, it would revitalize his career. We'd see a resurgent Le'Veon Bell, but we really haven't seen that. And I don't think I really like him here. I don't know that I'm going to be looking at Le'Veon Bell unless Clyde Edwards-Helaire's ruled out, and then maybe Le'Veon Bell at $5,100 or $6,000 on FanDuel. Maybe, but I think this is more of a game where Kansas City relies on that arm of Pat Mahomes, relies on his receivers, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce. But we'll get to those guys in just a moment. Any other running backs we're talking about? Well, yeah, I guess we got to talk about Uncle Lenny, who had a great game last week against the Washington football team. Kind of came out of nowhere and steamrolled WFT. Let's look at his game logs real quick. 23.2 in his last one against Washington. Carried the ball 19 times, 93 yards, and a touchdown. Also was involved in the passing game. You love to see that. Targeted 4 times, secured all 4 of them for 39 yards. So that's like 7 additional points over on DraftKings. And he was just $4,500. They've only bumped him up $400 on DK. So, I mean, that's not a huge jump. Maybe this guy's a little underpriced. What do you guys think? Leave a comment below. Let me know. But looking at his previous games, 4.7, 15.6, 21.5. So you can see what type of player Leonard Fournette can be. We already know what Uncle Lenny can do. Let's dial it all the way back to New Orleans in week 1, where he didn't really have a role in this offense yet. He rushed for 5 yards on 5 carries, caught 1 ball, ended up with 2.9 yards. Let's go week 9 and see if that indicates or reveals to us something different. Not very involved in the rushing game. He was actually more involved in the passing game as a receiver. Targeted 6 times, hauled in all 6 balls for 41 yards, ended the game with 10.1 fantasy points. Game script could be a problem here, guys. If New Orleans can come out and put some points up against this Buccaneers defense, well, you may see less of Leonard Fournette than you've seen in recent weeks. But let's look at Rojo, who is typically the starter here. We got some news on Rojo. He's dealing with both a quad issue and a finger issue. He was limited participant at practice on Thursday. So you're going to have to monitor Rojo's practice status for Friday. See if he's out there practicing. He's questionable. It looks like he's headed for a questionable designation. Rojo doesn't play, then by all means, fire up Leonard Fournette at just $4,900. I don't mind that whatsoever. Anybody else worth talking about? Any other ball carriers that we want to look at? Not really. Maybe Keyshawn Vaughn. He's got some upside as far as pass catching abilities. If Rojo's out, then Keyshawn Vaughn could be a good target for the PPR upside that he brings. But I think that's about it for running back. Right now, let's go ahead and lock in Leonard Fournette, hoping that game stays close. And, yeah, I think we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to pay up for Alvin Kamara. Plus, that gives us a nice little 1-2 punch on both sides of the ball here for that Buccaneers-Saints game. All right, let's move on to receiver. Keep it going here for our lineup construction. Wide receiver. The number 1 guy up at wide receiver is Tyreek Hill. He's priced up very, very high though, guys. $8,000 on DraftKings, $8,800 over on FanDuel. His projections on DK, 16.47 points and 13.43 over on FanDuel. Let's take a look at his game logs real quick and see what he's done in recent games. Just 10.5 versus Atlanta, but as we talked about, Mahomes, Kansas City, everybody on the offense was basically struggling that game. So we'll throw that one out. His game against the New Orleans Saints in Week 15, he put up 17.4 fantasy points. Going back to Week 14 against Miami, 26.1. And then Week 13, 14.8 fantasy points. So there you have it on Mr. Hill, who's averaging over 22 fantasy points per game. $7,900 though. That's going to be an expensive price tag, especially when you're paying up for Mahomes and you're paying up for Kamara. I mean, I don't know if we'll have enough money to take Mahomes and Hill and Kamara. We're just going to have to go through this here. Maybe there's cheaper options at receiver that make a little bit more sense. Next guy on the list, Michael Thomas. He wasn't really priced up a whole lot from last week to this week. I think he was $6,300 last week over on DK. He's just $400 more this week after having a very, very good game considering his price tag. $7,200 over on FanDuel. His projection on DraftKings, 15.31, and projection over on FanDuel, 11.8. Let's look at his game logs. We talked about his last game against Chicago. Ended the game with 18.3 fantasy points. Was targeted 7 times, hauled in 5 of them. Totaled 73 yards and a touchdown. So nice little comeback game for Michael Thomas after missing the previous few weeks. Looks like he's going to be good to go throughout the course of the playoffs. So I'm not really worried about health or, injury concerns or anything like that with him. If we go back to weeks 12, 13, and 14, 9.1 against Denver, very bad game there. 22.5 against Atlanta, and then 16.4 versus Philly. Now, this guy doesn't have a whole lot of games in his game log, but we do have a game, 2 games, against his previous, with his previous matchups against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. His first game back in week 1, he hauled in three catches on his 5 targets for just 17 yards, ended the game with 4.7 points. Not a good game for Thomas there. And then back in week 9, he was targeted 6 times, hauled in 5 of them for 51 yards. No touchdowns in that one either. So as you can see here, guys, averaging about a little over 7 fantasy points per game against the Buccaneers in 2 previous matchups. Not very good for Michael Thomas, but as I mentioned in his recent game logs, he's been playing much, much better, and I expect him and Drew Brees to be on the same page. They appear to be clicking. The rapport, the chemistry seems to be there, and I don't mind Michael Thomas here at just $6,600. I mean, $1,300 in savings over on DraftKings from Tyreek Hill down to Michael Thomas. So let's plug him in and see how the lineup takes shape. He's still kind of expensive compared to some of the other guys, but, big $1,300 savings coming down from Tyreek Hill. Moving down the line here, we got Jarvis Landry, Cleveland Browns, their top receiver by far. He's projected, priced at $5,600 on DraftKings, $6,900 over on FanDuel. His DraftKings projections, 12.38 points. And then over on FanDuel, 9.66 points for Jarvis Juice Landry. Looking at his game logs, his last few have been monsters. 20.2 against Pittsburgh, 16.4 against Pittsburgh, 19.1 against the Giants, and then just 11.68 against a tough Baltimore defense. But as you can see, the targets have been pretty consistent, 8, 6, 8, 9, and he's doing pretty well at securing those targets as well, and he's also been finding the end zone, scoring 2 touchdowns in 4 games, plus this game here against Pittsburgh, he also ran the ball in once, so that's a bonus. Not something that you should hang your hat on and expect from Jarvis Landry on any given week, but hey, if it happens, we'll take it, right? We'll take it. He's averaging 13.2 fantasy points per game on the season. As we mentioned, he's priced at $5,200. So as you can see here, guys, there's a lot of good receiving talent right here in the low 5,000 to 6,000 range. You got guys like Landry. We'll talk about the Bucs receivers in just a second. But yeah, that's a good way to go. Jarvis Landry, especially if the game plays out like I think it will, where Kansas City puts up massive points, putting pressure on Cleveland to try and keep pace and score with Kansas City. And Jarvis Landry could do really, really well in this game, as is the case with Baker Mayfield. So next guy on the list, though, Mike Evans. Mr. Evans, you are projected at $6,400 over on DraftKings, $7,100 on FanDuel. Looking at the projections, DraftKings 12.04 points for him there. FanDuel, 9.69 points for Evans there. Opening up the game logs for Evans. He played against Washington, even though he's dealing with that hyperextended knee. He did well, guys. He was targeted 10 times, caught 6 balls, 119 yards. So there's that 3-point bonus that we love to see. Ended the game with 20.9 fantasy points. The game before that against Atlanta, that was the one where he left early with the knee injury. So we're going to throw that one out. But going back to Detroit and his first meeting with Atlanta, 43.1 against Detroit. Huge game there. Targeted 12 times. Pulled in 10 of them for 181 yards and 2 touchdowns. Whew. If he does that this week, guys, you guys will be sitting very, very pretty. And then the game against Atlanta, he put in 20 points there. Let's go back to week 1 against New Orleans and see how Mr. Evans did. As you guys know, he's got a long-standing rivalry with Marshawn Lattimore, one of the cornerbacks for the New Orleans Saints. Looks like Lattimore got the best of Evans in this one. Evans, just 1 catch for 2 yards. Is that right? Wow. 1 catch for 2 yards. Ended up scoring a touchdown, though, so kind of helped salvage his day. 7.2 points was his total from that one. Fast forward to week 9 against New Orleans. Much better game here. Was targeted 6 times, secured 4 of them for 64 yards. Didn't find the end zone in this one, but ended up finishing with 10.4 fantasy points. So if you kind of average those two together, you know, he's right around that 8-9 point per game range. So there you have it for Mr. Mike Evans. Now let's move on to the other Tampa Bay Bucs receivers. We got Chris Godwin here. He's projected, priced at $6,100. I'm going to keep doing that. I'm going to keep saying projected and then, you know, talk about price, but we'll get over it. Priced at $7,500 over on FanDuel. His projections on DraftKings, 11.77, and then on FanDuel, 9.25. So there you have it for Chris Godwin. Let's open up the game logs real quick. He's questionable right now with a hip quadricep injury. He was a limited practice participant Thursday. So we're not sure how serious this injury is as of right now, but they're projecting him to play is DraftKings. Let's look at his game logs. His last game against the Washington football team was targeted 12 times, so you love to see that. Not in a very efficient day, though. Only caught 5 of those 12 targets, but did go for 79 yards and a touchdown. And the guy's been on a touchdown streak here going back, 4 games. So in his last 4 games, he's got 5 touchdowns. So big touchdown potential with Chris Godwin as of late. Looking back at his other games here, 33.3 against Atlanta, 19.4 against Detroit, and then a 13.6 against the Falcons in Week 15. Let's go back to his first game against New Orleans, though. He was targeted 7 times, hauled in 6 balls, 79 yards, did not find the end zone, but ended with 13.9 fantasy points. So, you know, typically, guys, when you look at like a running back or a receiver, you want to get 3 times their price tag back. So for Godwin, in this case, you know, that'd be a little bit under 18 points. But let's just call it 18 or more points would be sweet for Chris Godwin. Week 9 against New Orleans. New Orleans. He was targeted 6 times. Caught 3 of those targets for 41 yards. No touchdowns in that one either. 7.1. So if you average those two together, he's right around the 10 point per game mark against the New Orleans Saints. Let's talk about the next guy real quick. This 3-headed passing attack monster for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The final guy here is Antonio Brown. Brown, of course, had a massive game in Week 17 against the Falcons, but last week against Washington wasn't involved as much, only accruing 3 targets, but did secure 2 of those targets for 49 yards and a touchdown. He also gave you a bonus of 1 rushing attempt for another 22 yards. So that touchdown, those little bit of rushing yards, they ended up boosting him up to 15.1 fantasy points. Game before that against Atlanta, 39.8, almost 40 fantasy points against Atlanta, 13.5 against Detroit, and then 20.3 against Atlanta there. We do have 1 game log. This was like I think the first game Brown played was against the New Orleans Saints. He ended up getting targeted 5 times for 3 catches, 31 yards, no touchdowns, ended the game with 6.1 fantasy points. But, his role in the offense wasn't really there yet, guys. So take that one with a grain of salt. But he is the cheapest of the 3 Tampa Bay Buccaneers receivers at just $5,100. So if you want a piece of this Bucs offense, I like Brown. I like Brown as far as his price tag goes. $5,100, very, very reasonable. Who else do we have here? Rashard Higgins, Cleveland Browns. A lot of good receivers on the board, guys. Sorry this is taking so long, but we got to get through them. We got to break them all down for you and try to land on some good ones. He's projected, I did it again, doggone it. He's priced at $4,100, $5,300 over on FanDuel. Projected for 8.51 points over on DraftKings. And then FanDuel, they've got him at 6.96 points on that site. So, Higgins, a good cheap option here. I liked him last week too as a cheap option. Didn't really come through for us though. Pittsburgh held him in check. 4.8 fantasy points. Pittsburgh held him in check in the game before as well. 7.5 fantasy points. So maybe Pittsburgh just has this guy figured out. Maybe this is a good bounce back spot, especially again if you think Baker Mayfield is going to be forced into a situation where they have to pass a lot more than run. Then I expect the targets to go up. I expect the yardage to go up, and maybe even a touchdown is in play for Rashard Higgins. So good pay down option, super cheap. If you want to get a piece of the Cleveland Browns, I think Rashard Higgins is a good way to go to save some salary. Let's do it because we need to save some salary, right? I mean, look at the lineup so far. $7,900 here, $7,600 here, $6,600 here. Somebody's going to have to offer salary relief. Let's go Rashard Higgins as a way to bring it back and get a piece of the Cleveland Browns. Moving right along, though, I think some other names that I'm just going to touch on real quick. Emmanuel Sanders. He's an interesting option. He's obviously the number 2 wide receiver behind Michael Thomas now that Thomas is back in the lineup and healthy. You got Sammy Watkins, Mecole Hardman, a couple of the cheaper priced Kansas City guys. So if you're looking for someone cheap to pair up with Pat Mahomes, then look no further. Mecole Hardman, Sammy Watkins. Let's take a look real quick. Sammy Watkins didn't practice Thursday due to a calf injury. He didn't practice or play in Week 17. So as it says here in the news in DraftKings, he's in real danger of missing this game, guys. So if he misses the game, who steps up for KC? Well, Mecole Hardman maybe. Look what he's done in his last few games. Not much in these two, but if you go back a few more weeks, New Orleans and Miami, a lot bigger role here. So that could be a way to go. We've also got Robinson. He's another dude that we've rostered in the past when Watkins has been out. He's super cheap, $3,600. Another way to save some money. So if Watkins is out, you could look at Hardman. You could look at Robinson as some salary saving options and a way to stack up with Pat Mahomes. So let's do it. Let's take Robinson. Why not? Take a flyer on him and see what happens. You can see how things are taking shape here. We've got an average of just over $5,100 left for our remaining players. There's one guy that I'm really, really looking at. He's got the same potential as Tyreek Hill, and he comes in at $200 cheaper than Tyreek Hill. And I'm talking Travis Kelce, the best tight end in the league, in my humble opinion. So back over to the NFL Study Hub on teamriserfall.com. Travis Kelce, highest projected tight end, and for good reason. We know what this guy can do. If you look at his projection, 16.64 DraftKings points, way above everyone else at tight end, right? For good reason. And then over on FanDuel, 13, way above everyone else at tight end as well. Recent game logs for Kelce have been nothing short of outstanding. 22.8, 22.8, and you got a 30.6 and a 30.6. Look at how they mirror each other in back-to-back weeks. Kind of interesting there. But guys, this guy shines. We know what he's going to do. 12 targets, 10 targets, 12 targets, 13 targets. Expect double-digit targets for Kelce. This is a very soft matchup for him against Cleveland. Over the season, Cleveland hasn't done very well at guarding tight ends. They're not going to do well here. Nobody can stop this guy. He's got touchdowns in 4 straight games. Yeah. If I'm drooling, it's because I really like Travis Kelce. And so I'm going to try and force him into the lineup here. That leaves us with a flex spot and a defensive spot with $3,850 left. I think we can make that work. But let's talk about the other tight ends real quick before we go any further. Austin Hooper. He's probably my other second favorite tight end, especially again if this turns into a game script where Cleveland has to pass. We're going to keep talking about it because I really think that's what happens here. He's priced at $3,800 over on DraftKings, $5,500 over on FanDuel. Projected for just over 7 points on DK, and on FanDuel projected for 5.63. Let's look at his game logs real quick. Hoop, the man they call Hoop. He has been balling, guys. Look at this. 17.6, 13.7, 14.1, 15.1. So in his last 4 games, just absolutely crushing. His price tag, $3,700. I don't mind that. That's not bad, especially if you want to pay down a little bit at tight end and not go with a guy like Travis Kelce. But me personally, I'm taking Travis Kelce if you haven't noticed. But he's been, he being Hooper, has been targeted pretty often here in his last few games. 6, 15, 5, 11. So I could see him maybe getting between 6 and 10 targets in this one. Also been a touchdown magnet here in his last 4 games, hauling in 3 TDs over his last few games. So there you have it with Hooper. Next guy up is Rob Gronkowski. We'll come back to you, Jared Cook. Gronk, priced at $3,600 on DK, $5,600 on FanDuel. His projection, 5.69, 4.69 over on FanDuel. Let's look at his recent game logs. It's been the receivers lately, guys. Less about the tight ends, more about the receivers for the Tampa Bay Bucs. As you can see, Gronk was targeted just 1 time. Didn't haul that target in. I believe that one was a red zone target. They were trying to pass in the ball in the end zone and couldn't connect, Brady and Gronk. But his previous few games here, 4 targets, 2 targets, 7 targets. We need targets for our receivers and our tight ends. That's how they eat. That's how they score us points. He did manage 2 touchdowns, though, against Detroit. Let's hop in the DeLorean and head back in time to New Orleans, week 1. He was targeted 3 times, caught 2 of the balls for 11 yards. Not a very good game for Gronk. Ended the game with 3.1. And then we'll fast forward to week 9 against New Orleans. Not a good game for anybody on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense, really. As we talked about, they mustered up just 3 points. He caught 1 ball for 2 yards. Ooh. So ugly game there for Gronk as well. But he's just $3,500, guys. So he's got touchdown upside. He's got touchdown potential. I just don't think that I want to go there personally. It's looking like a real simple choice between Travis Kelce or Austin Hooper for me. Some of these other guys, they've got touchdown upside. Cameron Brate, maybe an Njoku, but not really loving a whole lot here. We talked about going back to Jared Cook, so let's do it. He's priced at $4,000 on DraftKings, $5,600 on FanDuel. Going across the board here to his projections, 7.05 points and then 5.84 points on FanDuel. We saw last week that the Buccaneers can be exploited by tight ends. Logan Thomas had a very good game for Washington. Ended up doing really, really well. So Jared Cook, maybe he can repeat where Logan Thomas did. Last week against Chicago, Cook had 8 points. Previous game, 14.3, 11.2, 4.9. At his price tag, I mean, he's going to need about 12 points to make it worth playing him he's gotten there once in his last 4 games. Let's go back to week 1. Against the Buccaneers, he was targeted 7 times, pulled in 5 balls for 80 yards. So that's a nice little game there. That would put him over his projection of, or over his value point of where we want him to be at 12 points, right? So 13 points would be a good one for Cook if he's able to do that this week. Fast forward to week 9 against the Bucs. He was targeted 3 times, caught 2 balls for 30 yards, no touchdowns. Also had a lost fumble, which made him not have a very good game. 4 points there. So if you can combine those two, he's right around the 8-point average against the Bucs this season. So there you have it on Cook. Let's move along here. I think we've talked about tight end quite a bit, and I'm ready to talk defense. I've got some interesting options here. Starting with the Kansas City Chiefs. They are the most expensive defense on DraftKings and the second most expensive defense on FanDuel. On DK, they're $3,600. They're projected to score 7 DraftKings points and 7 FanDuel points. Let's head over here and look at some recent game logs of what this Chiefs defense has been able to do. Not a good one here against the Chargers, -1 fantasy points. You don't like to see that. 7 against Atlanta, 2 against New Orleans, 14 against Miami. So we've talked about it, and it's been a reoccurring theme throughout today's show. If you think Cleveland falls behind and Baker Mayfield has to drop back and pass it, well, Baker can get sacked then. Baker can fumble. Baker can throw interceptions. So that's what you want to see. You want to see the opposing quarterback against your defense drop back as much as possible so that your team can rack up as many fantasy points as humanly possible. The next defense in the study hub, New Orleans Saints. They're projected to score 5.8 and 5.8. And they're priced at $3,300 over on DraftKings, making them the second most expensive defense, and $4,800 over on FanDuel, making them the number 1 most expensive defense. Now, Saints have been a great defense all season long. They've given the Tampa Bay Buccaneers trouble in their previous 2 games this season, as we've seen with some of these skill position players and their game logs on the Buccaneers side. I don't know if they could do it again, though. This looks like a different Buccaneers offense. I mentioned it before. Brady, you got Godwin, you've got Evans, you've got Brown, you've got Gronk, you've got Fournette. I mean, they're looking like they're all in sync and clicking on all cylinders. So it's going to be tough for me to expect anything major out of the Saints here, but let's see how they've done in their last few. You got 5 here against Chicago, a monster against Carolina, 17 points. That'll help you take down a GPP. 1 point against Minnesota and 7 against Kansas City back in Week 15. Let's rewind all the way back to Week 1, their first matchup against Tampa Bay. 17 again, guys. 17 against the Bucs in Week 1. Totally dominated. And then in Week 9, 16. Woo. Huge games. If this Saints defense can do this again, you got him in your lineup, sky's the limit. The sky is simply the limit. But at $3,100 and us only having $3,850 left, it's going to be tight, right? Then we got the Buccaneers defense. They're facing Drew Brees again for the 3rd time this season. Let's rewind all the way back to Week 1. How'd they do then? Well, 0. They got you nothing. And then in Week 9, 1. So they have combined in 2 games against the Saints this season for 0.5 fantasy points per game on average. So tough one for the Buccaneers. And then finally the Cleveland Browns. I'm just not even interested. I expect Kansas City to just hang up a ton of points against the Browns. So honestly, guys, for me, I'm looking at Kansas City probably or New Orleans. If you think that New Orleans gives this Buccaneers offense trouble like they have twice this season. But if we plug Kansas City in here, we're left with $4,200. Okay? $4,200. Now, what can we do with $4,200? Well, I mean, you go down the list here, you'd be looking at a guy like Emmanuel Sanders, Mecole Hardman. I don't know. Maybe Sanders is interesting to round out the lineup. With Michael Thomas back, he didn't have a good game last game, but you could see what he's capable of doing when he's the top dog. He eats without Thomas, but with Thomas, different story. So just throwing out some ideas there, guys, but I think that's going to do it for today's video. We've exhausted all positions. We've exhausted all lineups, all possibilities here. I hope that this video brings you some value. Head over to Team Rise or Fall for more stuff. They got the cheat sheets. They got the articles. They got the free Discord. If you're not part of their Discord, what are you waiting for? Jump in the Discord. Cost you this much money. Totally free for you. Check them out on Twitter as well. That's going to do it. This has been CJ for Rise or Fall. Good luck on Sunday. I hope you guys win some money, and we will catch you in the next one. See ya.